we're looking at a really substantial movement. And the biggest issue, like what you just said, Danny, the biggest issue is we're raising children that are full of faith. They're stable. They have hope for the future. They have faith in God. They want to carry on the faith from one generation to the next. And that's just what you said. And I was just thinking for a minute, we work with generations, and we had a byline. Try to remember. What was our byline? Passing on something.
Passing on
a faith. Passing on faith. That was it. We want to pass on the faith. It appears to be happening here.
Yes.
And welcome, friends, to the Generations broadcast. Kevin Swanson, your host, with you to talk about some of the best things, the things we like to come back to again and again. These are the core subjects that really characterizes the ministry of Generations. With me, Danny Craig, director for the organization. Thank you, Danny, for joining us in studio.
This is a pretty exciting program because we get to talk about the way I was raised.
And the way I was raised.
And the thing that you and I have both given our lives to.
Yes, that's true. And praise God for homeschooling for such a time as this. Truly believe that God has raised up home education as a very important aspect of reforming family and church in this day. And it also represents a very radical social shift in how we raise our kids. People used to ask the question, what about socialization? We came to homeschooling, Danny, and it turns out I didn't think it was an intelligent question, but now I've actually shifted, and I come to conclude that it is an intelligent question because you are rearranging the first domino in a child's social experiences. That being the case, it's going to affect the other dominoes in terms of their future family, in terms of their future economic contributions, in terms of their interaction with the church, and so forth. So now the big question is it good or bad in terms of its outcome? I think that's the question people are wondering is you guys are doing something very strange, something that the world had done for 5,900 years prior to the modern public school phenomenon. But what's happening is we're bringing it back. And now we have a contrast between the conventional form of institutionalized education and home education.
The reason that's an intelligent question to ask is because we all realize and all know deep down that the educational approach you choose for your life has a way bigger impact on your life than just bare academics.
Yeah.
It's going to define the entire way that your life is constructed in terms of marriage, family, church relationships, belief in God. The whole kit and caboodle is all tied in.
And I used to speak at homeschool conferences and say, I graduated in 1981 from my homeschool. I turned out really good. And so y'all need to do it. They're like,
wait, you actually
sample
did say
size
that?
of one, and maybe you're not as good as some have been, and so forth. So yeah, it turns out the anecdote, turns out the sample size of one doesn't quite cut it, So, and then I usually wind up saying, oh, wait, come back. There more people have been homeschooling than me,
Right.
So thankfully there's been others, and granted, it is a distribution, right? I mean, there's what I would call the normal distribution. You've got the plus 3 standard deviations, minus 3 standard deviations, both sides of it. And so there is a distribution. And there's no one size fits all, and there's no silver bullet. And so we have to be careful. There's no recipe that just, everything's going to be perfect if you do it this way.
Right. One of the things that you said when we released the Gen 2 survey, in terms of our kind of first stab at doing an analysis of homeschooling and the impact that it's had on homeschoolers, is you said homeschooling is a context. It's not the silver bullet, but it is a context. Mm-hmm. And wow, that context plays out in some pretty consistent ways.
It could provide for a really good context in which good things could happen.
Yep.
And we say always, by the grace of God.
Right.
We always add, by the grace of God. So my recipe is just very simple. Get down on your knees, look up to God, and say, help me, God, help me now. So that's the one recipe that we recommend. Mm-hmm. But here's a survey that's come from the Cardis Education Survey, conducted in the U.S., apparently 2011, 2014, 2018, again in 2023. And they have put together this amazing report. Albert Cheng and Angela Watson from this educational clearinghouse. I don't believe this is a Christian group. I think it's a secular group, but they've put together a nationally representative sample of adults aged 24 to 39. So they're graduated from college and moving on with life. So this is much like the Gen 2 survey that we put out, as you said, about 8-9 years ago. But this one, I would say better. And here's why. Because it's representative sample. taken, 3,000 adults in America, found the 180 some that had been homeschooled themselves. That's 8% of the American population has been homeschooled, according to this survey. And I think that's probably the most accurate number we're going to get for right now. 8% of the American population has been homeschooled for at least 1 year. And that's a very important caveat, because only about 20% actually go the distance, meaning only 20% are like you and me. I think both you and I were homeschooled for some 12 years straight through. So 8% of Americans homeschooled, only 20% go the distance, which means 1.6% of the U.S. population of kids actually get homeschooled for
K-12.
K-12, right, all the way through. And that amounts to about 800,000 homeschooled kids in America being homeschooled all the way through right now. 56% of homeschoolers will quit by junior high. And that's, I think, the stats that I'm used to. One of the big lessons or takeaways here, because Danny, what they did here is they compared non-homeschooled to the 1 year, 2 year homeschooled, to the 3 to 7 year homeschooled, to the all the way through 8 to 13 years homeschooled. So they have these categories, and they find that there is actually a substantial difference with those who went the distance. And generally, it was really, really good news. Now, can I give you the bad news first?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
Hit me.
Okay, here it is. Only 26% of homeschooled graduates actually got college degrees, compared to 46% of the rest of the population. So I'm sorry for breaking your heart. I'm sorry, Danny. I just broke your heart, didn't I?
They didn't go through with the full indoctrination system?
They didn't get the full college experience.
Oh, no. That's
only
terrible.
26% actually went through for a bachelor or master's degree.
And
now, we're not saying that's bad, right?
No,
or is it?
I was actually
bad,
thinking,
good?
I was actually thinking.
But most people would say, what a failure. Homeschooling has been a failure for this country.
And we look at that and we say, wow, these pioneers are pioneering. And they pioneered K through 12. And guess what? If you look at the outcomes, they did not need to go back into the system. After staying out of the system for 13 years, their life succeeded. Yeah. And the people who tended to stay out of the system longer, if we look at the rest of the data, did better.
They seem to have done very well. Yeah. Now, we're not saying that somebody who gets an engineering degree or a degree through, a nursing degree or something like that has been ineffective in what they're doing. But I think what happens with homeschoolers is they're getting out of the box, they're getting into the real world, they're getting real world experience, they're getting the mentorships, the internships, and they're not as interested in just locking themselves up into brick and mortar colleges for the next 4 to 6 years and not actually engaging some life integration experiences, and things like that.
I think that's a big question that a lot of homeschool families have to answer. I remember that transition at 18 plus, where we were answering the question, what is the Craig family going to do for life after homeschool? And people would sort of get this terrified look in their eyes. They'd be like, you're not going to try to homeschool through college, are you? And we'd be like, is that possible? Because we were thinking, hey, if the principles of individuality, a focus on character, life integration were such a blessing, K through 12, why wouldn't we want to continue those principles post high school? And I think what this data is showing us is other people are thinking the exact same way.
At least they're getting out of the box.
Yes.
And I think that's the key. And certainly with the economic situation, by the way, the percentage of young people in college today has dropped off about 20% in the last 15 years anyway. So there's a huge percentage of American young people who are saying, let me get out into the workplace, make some money, do something practical. But there's a couple other stats that are really, really important here. I think significant. 62% of homeschool grads are presently working in the marketplace. 26% not working. That compares to 72% of non-homeschoolers working, 17% not working. So you've got 62% of homeschool grads working, 72% of non-homeschool grads working. Man, those homeschoolers are lazy.
You know what?
Man, they're lazy. But the answer is they're getting married and they're having kids. So that's the reason. They're getting married, they're having kids. So there's a fairly strong percentage. That 10% difference is going to be young ladies. And they're moving into the one income household. That's what's going on.
That shows up in that household income.
I said, oh, wow. only 62% of homeschool grads are actually working, and 72% of non-homeschoolers are working. What in the world is going on with the homeschoolers? Well, they're staying at home and they're having kids. And these homemakers, I wish they'd actually do something. I wish your wife, I know she's a homemaker. She's just not working. What's she doing? Eating
Get a real
bonbons
job
all day? Yeah, get a real job. What do you think she'd say to that? What would these homemakers, these moms who are out there laboring 16, 18 hours a day, 3, 4, 5 kids in the house,
I'll tell you what they're doing.
What are they doing here?
They're raising kids who are twice as likely to believe in God, twice as likely to believe in the afterlife. Kids who are significantly more satisfied in life. Kids who are attending church on a regular basis, and
which is the rest of the study.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
that's
thank you,
the rest
Mom.
Of the study. Yeah.
Thank you, Mom.
Thank you, Mom. Yeah. Big thank you card to Mom.
Yeah.
Thanks for doing all that hard work over 18 years. Yeah, just a special card to Mom. Maybe an email to Mom this afternoon. Okay, does that sound right, Fred? Fred's our audience right now. Fred, just send a thank you card to Mom. Thanks for all the hard work. But homeschooled median household income is also lower than the average. 65% of homeschoolers are earning something lower than the median household income average in America. Non-homeschoolers, it's right at 50%. So they're actually earning less money as a household, but remember they're getting married and they're moving to a single income household so that they can have 1.4 kids. And it's about a 40% increase on the percentage of children or number of children they're getting on average. And we'll get to that in just a moment.
I think the other thing is they have different values, and that shows up in one of the other stats. One of the things that's significant for them is a much higher value of hard work over money. Wait, that sounds like Colossians 3.
Yeah.
Whatever you do, do it heartily as
unto the Lord.
Knowing that from the Lord you will receive the reward of your inheritance.
And this I think was the most interesting and creative question that these surveyors asked these homeschool graduates and the non-homeschool graduates. It was, how important is money as a value? How important is hard work as a value? For non-homeschoolers, 34% said, hard work's important. Or 42% said hard work's important. 34% said money's important. But for homeschoolers, only 19% said money is important to them.
Yeah.
And 54% said the value of hard work is important, meaning that the character trait, the core character trait of hard work and following through in the responsibilities that God has given an individual is far more important of a value to homeschool graduates than it is to non-homeschool graduates.
Sounds a little bit like Matthew 6:33. Seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you.
Well, yeah, because I think what the Word of God tells us is that we train our children not to just get, good academics, good grades, so that they get into a good college, so they can get a good job. No, we're seeking the things that God considers to be important first, which turns out not to be the math, but it turns out to be the character trait of diligence, of honor from mom and dad, of faith and character and these things that are important. Those are the things that we're training our children to be in the context of the math class. So the end objective or goal in teaching math for us, for Christians, is the things that matter most to God, which is the faith, the character of the child, not so much they just learns how to factor trinomials.
By humility and the fear of the Lord are riches, honor, and life. And it seems when I look at these stats, you just get the sense that the whole American academic system is built with the pursuit of the financial outcome. Whereas we turn that on its head and we say, no, we're raising kids to love and serve God, and the money and the blessings will fall where they fall.
Yeah. And so guess what is important to us? That is the things that God considers to be important. And we just trust He will add those things we need to us as we go. And this I think is probably the reason why homeschoolers are not so much graduating from college, not so much earning quite the median household income as the rest of the nation, and they're moving to the one income household. The reason they're doing it is because of this stat that you see right in front of you, Danny. That is, there are 65% of these homeschooled graduates already married. So 65% of of the sample size that was taken, I think it was something like 24 to 35 or whatever, 65% already married compared to 44% of non-homeschoolers. And the average number of kids for these homeschool graduates already married, 1.23 versus 0.84 for the non-homeschooler. Now, this was the first data I've gotten in 30 years of working with the homeschool population where we have what I believe to be a pretty solid birth rate for homeschoolers. Okay. And so the birth rate, according to this ratio, the birth rate for homeschoolers, that is homeschooled kids who grew up in homeschooled families, is 2.5, as opposed to 1.7 for the rest of the population. So that's pretty significant.
That tells you something about priority in life.
They're obviously appreciating kids.
Yeah.
And we're living in a nation where, we're in houses twice the size with half the children we had in 1950, which means the value is, I just love drywall. I love high median incomes. I love drywall. I want more median incomes. I want less kids, more drywall, because I'm really all about money, and I'm all about money to purchase more drywall because I want a house that's twice the size and I want half the kids than we had in 1950. These are the values that the American public holds dear. Now, the only way in which human civilization is going to survive, Danny, I truly believe this, is if we can get it above 2.1, and everybody knows this. This is obvious to everybody. All the demographers understand this, but of course, our nations are imploding. The only thing that could possibly salvage a population or a civilization would be families that get these values down. They get to the point where they say, you know what? I really do want to have children. Let's get married, have children. We'll hit the 2.5, maybe even the 3.0 on average. Some of us might, get up towards 4.3. It's hard to have 0.3 of a child, but we're going to up that number because we love children. We love family. These are higher values to us than to get into a good college, get out of the good college, obviously rack up $80,000 in college debts, pay that off by 34, maybe get married at 37, have a really good time, travel the world, and maybe freeze the eggs. Because if you can freeze the eggs, maybe you can have a child at 42. And that becomes sort of the worldview, social view that drives the population out there. And Danny, I don't think that's the value system of the average homeschool graduate, according to this survey.
Yeah, one of the stats that was interesting to me is this question, is it important for parents to teach their children about religious beliefs? And I think there's a few things layered in there. Yeah. One of those is just your perspective of the importance of the parent-child relationship, right?
Yeah.
And so if you did not have a good parent-child relationship, you're probably not going to value the importance of discipleship, right?
Yeah.
Well, here's the interesting thing. Long-term homeschoolers are 62% more likely to believe in the importance of parents teaching children than non-homeschoolers, which generally indicates they had a positive experience with their parents and they want to give the same thing to their kids. And so what I'm saying is, it all ties together. You have a total shift in values and priorities. And when parents and moms and dads make the commitment to do this kind of investment in their kids, it shows up in what their kids experience. I was valued by my parents. I appreciated the input. They taught me that was important. I want to do the same thing for my kids.
Now we're talking on average. And for anybody listening, we're just talking on average here. Just looking at a study, it's finding an average is doing better with homeschooling than the non-homeschool population in many of these metrics. But let's also consider the fact that our Gen 2 survey found 80% of homeschool graduates said they would homeschool their own kids, meaning the second generation. And if the second generation is having 2.5 children per family, you know where I'm going with this. They're having 2.5 children per family on average, which is above the national average. 80% of homeschooled graduates are going to homeschool their own kids.
Okay.
This puts the second generation homeschoolers upwards of 3 to 5 million by the year 2035, and add to that the 3 to 5 million of the first gen, and you're up to anywhere between, I'd say, 6 to 10 million homeschooled kids by the year 2035. So we're looking at a really substantial movement, and the biggest issue, like what you just said, Danny, the biggest issue is we're raising children that are full of faith. They're stable. They have hope for the future. They have faith in God. They want to carry on the faith from one generation to the next. And that's just what you said. And I was just thinking for a minute, we work with generations, and we had a byline. Trying to remember, what was our byline? Passing on something.
Passing on
a faith. A faith. That was it. We want to pass on the faith. It appears to be happening here.
Yes. Well, let's get into those stats.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Okay. Emotionally, homeschool graduates, way more stable, 12-year, long-term homeschool, doing better in depression, anxiety, dealing with problems in life, positive thoughts about the future. I don't have all that data, but it's head and shoulders above on every one of those stats. They're much more involved in civic involvement. And by the way, the Homeschool Grows Up survey that Brian Ray did, I'm going to say 15 years ago, he found homeschoolers were 13 times more likely to be involved in civic involvement, as in politics, et cetera. Here, it looks like, a bit head and shoulders above. They're more likely to volunteer at church. They're more likely to attend church. This might have been the biggest distinction. Danny, we're looking at, again, a random survey of Gen Zers and maybe a little bit of Gen X there, or millennials. Okay.
2.5 times. Almost three times more likely.
Almost 3 times more likely to attend church today. Homeschool graduates who went the distance, 12 years, all the way through with their parents. That's the 800,000 students who made it through. Thank you, Mom. You hung in there for those 18 years. Thank you for putting up with me for 18 years. Fred? Thank you, Mom. Praise the Lord for my mom. She went the distance, and now 54% of homeschool graduates are going to church. 54% versus 19% for the rest of the population. And reading the Bible was even more of a pretty significant
It was almost
gap
over
there.
3x. Reading the Bible
3x.
or any other sacred
reading
text.
the Bible, 59% of homeschoolers that went the distance read their Bibles. And only 18% of non-homeschooled kids in America read their Bible. What does that tell you? Something significant happening with the homeschool movement.
It's pretty exciting stuff, to be honest.
That's something. Faith in God, 72:41. Life after death, 64:33, which is almost double. That's almost double there. So what do we say?
And all the relational stats, too. Yeah. There's the stat on close social relationships. I would like to just have everybody that's ever asked the question about how do you socialize your kids see that stat, because it's all there.
Better socialized than their counterparts in the
less
public
divorce, more value of marriage, all of
on and on it goes. Okay. Homeschoolers 3 times more likely to attend church, read the Bible. Homeschoolers make less money, but they get married and have kids. Homeschoolers put hard work and marriage ahead of money as a value. What do you think of that? Putting hard work and marriage and giving ourselves up to marriage and to have kids and to be waking up at 2 a.m. and changing diapers and doing the bucket brigade because 3 of the kids were sick all night long. What are the values in life? Do we seek money first? Is that the most important value? Or is it working hard, taking on responsibilities, raising a family? What are the values to which we are raising our children? This is where I want to go today, Danny.
There's 2 thoughts that come to mind. One of them is, of course, all of the sort of satisfaction in life metrics ultimately come back to one's faith in God and one's relationship with God, which seems to be showing up here.
Yes.
There's more faith, there's more presence of God in their lives. Mm-hmm. But it's also God's way of doing life. And we want to bring those 2 things together, right? One of the things we're passionate about here is passing on the faith and alongside of that, fruitful families. And God brings those 2 things together in His word, in His instructions. It's fruitfulness and faith together that you see in this survey. Mm-hmm. That is God's prescription, and it's His blessing all at the same time.
Yes. Danny, I want to talk to the mamas in the middle of it. Now, we wanted to do a program on this because there are moms.
Yeah.
My daughters, for example, they're in the middle of the school year.
My wife's in the middle.
Your wife's in the middle of it. And we want to encourage that mom who is trying to slog through the math and the penmanship.
Yeah.
First of all, as we said, we've got to keep our eye on the ball. It's not about the money. It's not about the math. And I think every mom knows this. Now, we're teaching math, but it's not really about the math. It's about nurturing faith and character in the children. And that's my first principle in my book, Upgrade, the 10 Secrets, because you got to keep your eye on the ball. What matters is not that they're learning how to add and subtract and factor trinomials. What matters is the faith and the life and the character of your children in the math class.
Yeah. Last week, we had the Shepherd's Conference here at Generations, in which we're encouraging and exhorting men who, in most cases, I think most of the men in that room were homeschool dads. But one of the things that stood out to me was Scott Brown's message. He was talking about raising daughters. And one of the things he said a couple of times is the thing that the devil fears most is the homeschool mom at home discipling her children in God's word. And then I went to church on Sunday and I talked to several homeschool moms whose husbands were at the conference, and I heard it was a really hard week. In other words, that was the validation. Absolutely. How do you know that Satan's concerned about it? He's attacking these moms. They're facing the difficulty in the trenches. And I think when moms experience this, nonstop full court press from their children, they need to realize there's something bigger going on here. There's something spiritual going on. They're also pushing back against the entire force of darkness in that process as well. And so I think that very thing that gets moms down about like, oh, this is so hard, I'm not doing a good job, that's actually the sign that you're winning, that you're doing something important.
Yeah, and you're up against, the sin that shows up in your children's hearts and lives, and the sibling rivalry and the pushing against mom and not really wanting to follow through on mom's orders, and the disrespect and the, all of these things I think can be really pretty much the biggest drag and the most difficult challenge that moms would face. I mean, homeschooling Jesus, you know what I'm saying? I think that would have been a little bit nicer and easier than to do what our homeschool moms are doing now. And that is, and I think what we need to encourage them to is, number one, let's encourage them to prayer and reliance upon Jesus in this process. Remember that they're not in charge of saving their kids, but they are responsible for patiently, line upon line, precept upon precept, leading their children to the gospel. And that is, kids, we all sin. You sinned. You obviously sinned against your sister just then. And we need Jesus. We need Jesus to come here and save us from these sins. Trust and obey, for there's no other way to be happy in Jesus but to trust and obey. How many times we sing that as our children were growing up? But just to be continually bringing these messages to bear, and yes, addressing the spiritual warfare element, but also understanding that these are strongholds and these are obstacles and mountains to move, and we're only going to do it by prayer. I would say prayer is the most important thing to prepare a mom for the day. And dads also should be praying over their wives and taking this spiritual warfare seriously on any given day. Before you leave the house, pray over your wife, pray over the kids, and then we come out back in the afternoons, the evenings, pray over them again. Let's go over the day. Let's find out what happened. And let's do a little teaching, a little guidance as well, and then pray over the children one more time. So I honestly think these strategies will get us through. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think we also want to talk to the dads too. And one of the things I want to say, is thank you, Dad, for being that single income provider, right? I mean, that's a big part of what we're seeing in here.
That's a big deal.
There is that there is this significant component of dad taking responsibility financially in a way that allows for this. So there's that. So thank you, Dad. Thank you, dads who are listening.
Yes.
And the other thing is just to piggyback off of what you were saying. We really do set the tone and structure for so much of what happens while we're gone. And it is amazing to think about how the influence that we have before we go to work and the influence that we have after we go to work, how much that lays a foundation for what our wives accomplish. We may not be in the day in and day out of teaching math or science, but the discipline and the teaching that we bring is significantly important.
One more thing I'd encourage moms with is be careful not to assign too much. At points, you want to take some baby steps in the right direction. It might be in terms of character or in terms of the sorts of assignments that you bring to your children. You want to assess between frustrating the child in the schoolwork versus challenging the slothful or the recalcitrant child. That's a balance there. Is it just that they're pushing back because this is an attitude issue and we have to work through this, maybe even gradually, but by faith and by consistent pressing on the child and some discipline along the way, we're going to try to make some progress through these character issues. But at the same time, we want to be careful that we're not pushing them too hard through the material themselves. In other words, intellectually, they might not quite be ready to go at the pace that you're taking right now in the content. So I think assessing some of those things are helpful. Also, assessing the difficulty of the day is important. It's important to be able to say, you know what, we are hitting DEFCON 3 or DEFCON 2. We're rising up to closer to DEFCON 1 this morning, and we're going to need more prayer. So to just call the hubby or even call a pastor. You did that once.
I did that last week.
As I recall, I think you called me.
I did. Yeah.
And we prayed together over a child.
Yes.
Yeah. So in other words, you were probably closer to a DEFCON 2 working into 1.
Working it up.
And the point is that, okay, we're having a hard day. We're having a hard week. I think it's important to confess that. Yeah. Maybe even bring that out on a Sunday morning when you're, fellowshipping with some of the other brothers or sisters in the congregation, or you're at prayer meeting. And just have to, ask for prayer and say, you know what, God can get us through this, but man, we are up against some mountains, some real challenges right now in terms of attitude, academics, these sorts of things. So prayer will make a way for us. I think that's what we're saying.
Yeah, and also a sense of vision. The reality is homeschooling is harder for a variety of reasons, but one of the reasons it's harder is just because your kids are going to tend to let their character issues hang out more at home. And we might look at that and be like, oh, that's rough. But really what God is doing is he's giving us an opportunity to see these sins surfaced in our children's lives in the middle of the penmanship class, in the middle of, the sibling squabbling during classes, the pushback on chores. All of those things, I know from my wife, just kind of mount up and up and up in terms of this burden. But the reality is God is showing us our kids' sins, our needs, and as Paul Tripp likes to say, he's bringing to the surface the need for God's redeeming grace. Yeah. And so while it might seem like it's 2 steps backwards, 1 step forward, or on a bad day, really that we need to just take a different measuring stick out and say, well, we're primarily measuring the development of faith and character. Yes, the academics will come by God's grace, but we're focusing on the important stuff. And we're also playing the long game.
And to realize this is where God does his work. We're on the field now.
Yeah.
You're taking advantage of an opportunity. The math class, the chores, whatever it is, that's the context in which character is assessed, in which, yes, we begin to realize the character issues that are there with our children's lives. And yet, also the opportunity to see God do his work. You don't teach character while you're sitting around watching cartoons or where kids are isolated into the little games. They actually get along quite well with each other. If they're just like working their little computer thing on their phone, they seem to get along quite well. Well, that's because we're not in the context in which character could be formed, in which we begin to see the character issues that need to be taken care of by the grace of God. So I guess the best thing I can say right now for moms that are in the trenches right here and right now is 3 words. Hang. Okay, that's the first word.
Got
hang.
it.
Got it?
Hang.
In. Okay.
There.
Okay, that's it. Hang in there. Hang in there. By the grace of God, hang in there, by prayer, by faith, by confidence in the living Christ who can work amazing things. You can do all things through Christ who strengthens you. Hang in there, Mom. Hang in there, Dad. That's the lesson today. Yeah. The people who went the distance. It's amazing what God does. Look up after 18 years and see that God did something. And just be faithful along the way. We'll leave you there, friends, on this edition of Generations. Encourage you to our little book, Upgrade, the 10 Secrets to the Best Education for Your Child. That's kind of like the the core stuff in terms of this vision, Danny. So get a copy of Upgrade, the 10 Secrets to the Best Education for Your Child at generations.org. This is Kevin Swanson and Danny Craig inviting you back again next time as we continue to lay down a vision for the next generation. This has been a production of the Generations Media Network. For more information, go to generations.org/media.